Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 973. Had the white pieces and started off with d4. My opponent went knight f6, I went c4, and he went g6. So far so good. It looks like he's going for either a King's Indian or a Grunfeld. And the move I always play here, which is the top choice in the database, is knight c3. Not for any special reason, it's just that that was the first move in the database, and that's the line I learned. I was a little bit confused for some reason when I was playing this game and played knight to f3 instead. And I found myself not sure of what to do. Although it turns out I played okay here. So I often go for a fianchetto setup against the King's Indian. And so that's what I did. And he castled. And then I went bishop g2. So all this looks very normal. And then he played d5, another move that kind of threw me. If he had played d6, then I would have castled or played knight to c3, and we would have gotten into the very standard kind of position that I was expecting. And you can see that is the top choice. d5, and during the game I actually thought this was a mistake, but it seems like it's a playable line. His actual mistake comes in a move or two. He did get a worse position out of the opening eventually, so taking is fine. And then e4, the move I played, is not the top choice there. So I wanted to take a look at this and see what white should play in this position. It looks like just ignoring the knight for the moment, castling. And the knight moves away. This is funny, the knight moves away to b6 anyway without being prompted. So you can retain some flexibility with that e-pawn. Maybe you want to put it on e3 to defend the center. And in fact, that's what happens in the main line here. I go knight to c3. It goes knight c6, and then I go e3. And so the pawn is on e3 instead of e4, and I have a very solid center here, and it helps to shut out this bishop. Now black will play rook e8, maybe try to get in e5 break. So it looks like an interesting position for both sides, and that seems to be a fine position. Anyway, in the game, I went with e4, and here is black's first real mistake. He went back to f6 instead of going to b6, as we saw in the other line. This often happens in these fianchetto setups. Knight comes out, comes to the center, and gets chased away. And it's often better to go to the queen side rather than go back to the king side. I think there's two reasons for this. One is over there the knight is staying out of the way of the bishop. And the other reason is it's also staying out of the way of the f-pawn. It's often an idea to push the f-pawn forward in these King's Indian defenses to get counterplay against the center or on the king side. So knight b6 does both of that, and it just seems strange to a player like me who's used to just focusing on development and putting your pieces on good squares. That is not a particularly good square for the knight. It's going to have to move again to get back into the game, but it is influencing a few squares near the center or in the center, so it's not completely useless there. But yeah, it doesn't look like the best piece in the world, does it? So it's interesting that it's so often the case that going back to b6 is better than going back to f6. But knight f6, Chess Engine starts to give white a pretty big advantage already. And well, we get some normal developing moves. I go knight c3, he goes bishop g4, I kick it. And then here's his second mistake. And the combination of these two mistakes, knight retreating to f6 and bishop retreating back to d7, that's what he played. This is almost an overwhelming position for white. I think if I was a stronger player, there would be absolutely no chance for black in this game already. He had to take the knight, for better or for worse. When you put the bishop out there and you get kicked, you don't want to retreat again in many cases. I mean, there are always exceptions, but in this case that retreat was just bad. So he just had to trade the bishop off, and this should still be a playable position for black. And whereas after the retreat, actually white should just win this. But well, chess is not so simple, and complications can still happen. So he played queen c8, lining up on my h-pawn, so I defended it. Went knight c6, so he's starting to get his pieces out, and I played bishop e3, and this is where I give some of that advantage back. It's often the case when you have this pawn duo here that you just want to keep it and enjoy this space advantage, and that's the idea I was playing with. But while you have this pawn duo here and there's nothing stopping either of those pawn moves, you really should consider them. And in fact, d5 looks like a really strong move here, and even e5 is a good move here, better than the move I played, bishop e3. The reason is that, well, the reason you don't play the move d5 is that it gives up the dark squares here in the center, and so he can maybe put a piece there. But he can't put a piece there now. I have control of that square, so this knight has to retreat. Knight to d8, or maybe it could go out to the side. I mean, it's got a couple places it could go to, but neither of them are particularly good. And that's why even e5 is good in this position. His knight can't hop into the d5 square because, once again, I've got that covered. So either of those pawn pushes would have been good here. The chess engine prefers d5 the best. So bishop e3 is me giving back some of that advantage I had, and black should have a playable position now. A little bit cramped. He gets in e6, however, and now if I push either pawn, now if I push here, he can bring the knight out, and if I push here, he can just trade it off. So he's slowed down my pawn pushes in the center. So we get some normal moves for a while. I play queen d2. He goes knight to e7. Wasn't sure about that, but it's an idea to push the c pawn forward and break up the center, and maybe it's going to do something on the king side at some point. Let's see, I went bishop h6 here. I decided to trade off his bishop before the center opens up. He went bishop c6. I guess that was his idea with that maneuver. He puts his knight here, puts his bishop here. That's kind of interesting. So now I am prevented from pushing that pawn forward. And he is ganging up on my e-pawn, so I need to defend it. So he played b6, so he has a little hideaway for his bishop here. I went ahead and traded, and then played rook to c1. He dropped his bishop back to b7, and went queen f4. I wasn't sure about this move during the game, but it turns out to be okay. It's one of the engine choices here. There are many things that white can play in this position. Knight to e5 is one of them. Knight to e5 would have been even stronger when the bishop was still on c6. Would have gained a tempo, but well, the bishop was going to retreat to b7 anyway, so maybe it didn't make too much difference. Anyway, queen f4. He went rook d8. So now this is another move where he's still got a position here he can play, although it's starting to look pretty dangerous. But well, he can play something like h6, try and keep my knight out of the g5 square. If I hop in with b5, he can push it to c6. I can still bring my knight into this d6 square, but well, he can start to harass it like this, maybe bring the other rook over. But the important point is leaving that rook on f8 to defend the f7 pawn. It really matters a lot. Let's see. I could push on with e5 here to cement this knight in here. So this is a really good position for white, but still something that black can play, I guess. Anyway, he went rook d8, and once again, I should just win from this point. And I play some good moves. I play knight b5. That's good. That's a correct response here. He plays c6. And now, well, there's a couple good moves here. Not the one I played, but I could put the knight into g5, starting to put pressure on that f7 pawn, or I could put the knight into d6. Both of those are good moves. And I was worried about this knight h5 move, chasing my queen away, and I played the move g4 to prevent it. But that was completely unnecessary. It's an example of being scared of ghosts. It's knight d6 is a fine move here. Queen d7 is a recommended response. He's just threatening to take that knight with his battery, but then I can play e5, and I'm going to crash through here. He might even be better off sacrificing the exchange there rather than playing queen d7. But anyway, to go back to the move I was afraid of, knight h5. Knight h5 just loses because I can take here with check. and after the king moves, I can take his queen. So, so I was afraid of that knight h5 move, but that was a move that was completely losing. So anyway, g4. This is a good example of you shouldn't play moves that prevent your opponent from making mistakes, which is a principle I've heard people say. If you haven't heard it before, it's something to think about. You play a move that prevents a move from your opponent, but that move is actually a mistake. So if you had done your calculations right in the first place and realized that your opponent's move was a mistake, then you would know not to play this move because you're preventing him from making mistakes. You want to allow your opponent to make mistakes when you're playing a game. So it's actually a very important principle, but it requires you to calculate. You have to realize that your opponent's move is a mistake there. Okay, so I played g4. It doesn't give away the whole advantage, but it does make things a little more complicated for me to break through. In fact, he has a good defensive move with knight e8. He can just try and control this square with his knight, trade my knight off when it hops in. Well, actually, I can't even go there now. And I guess if I come in with the knight, he might push the f-pawn forward now that he's gotten his knight out of the way. So that is still better for white. White is still putting pressure on black, and black is on the defensive, but maybe a position black can hold. Instead, he defended with queen d7. It's the same idea, trying to keep my knight out of this square, but it's not as effective because I can bring my other knight in, chase the queen around. And so once again, I'm now winning. So let's continue on. Let's see. He played, no, it's my turn here. Yeah, I went in with knight c7. That's right. After the queen went back, there was a fork there. So yeah, now I'm actually just winning material. And they do keep the material edge the rest of the game, although I don't play the best moves from here on out either. I miss a few things. Oh, he took with the bishop. Let's back up. He took with the bishop. Yeah, he had moved his queen over to keep this pawn defended. He'd recognized his weakness there, so now his knight is free to move. Let's see, I push it away with g5. Goes out here to h5, and I just drop my queen back. I want to keep pressure here, but I didn't go to f3. I went to e3 because I also wanted to defend my d-pawn there. So he played f5. I took en passant, and he took back with the queen. I was expecting him to take with the knight, but this is okay as well. And then I come in with knight g4. He comes in with the check. And well, I just trade. There's going to be a trade one way or another. The chess engine slightly prefers king back to g1. And well, this is okay too. And so we've got a position here where I am the exchange up, but black has finally gotten all his pieces into the game. And, it's still something he can play on and hope for mistakes. Let's see, I went rook c to d1. Want to put my rook behind this pawn, keep it defended. He took the bishop off. It wasn't really a great way to defend that bishop. I could have dropped it back. I mean, to keep the bishop, I could have dropped it back to f1, but anyway, this seems to be okay to just give it up and keep the material. Now he went knight f5. And that's just a blunder, of course. Let's see. If he wants to play on, the chess engine is recommending h5, knight e5, c5, opens up the bishop, and creates a pin. Then he could think about playing knight f5. Yeah, I just had a hallucination here. After he played knight f5, it's not that I was afraid of the discovered check. I just thought this pawn had already been moved, and this pawn was pinned. Otherwise, his move knight f5 would make no sense. In fact, it does make no sense. So this is an example of not trusting your opponent too much. And there is no pin here. I can just take that. So in this c5 check, I can just step aside with my king. There's no real follow-up. Let's say he can take here. Oh, the chess engine recommended taking with the g-pawn. I can put my knight here. I'm just a rook up here. And maybe he gets a pawn. But it's not going to last. I'm going to be able to mop up with my extra piece. Well, it's an extra rook. So, yeah, he doesn't have a killer attack or anything. So that would have been, of course, the way to play that. Instead, I played f3. So a move that makes no sense unless you realize that I thought I really thought that e-pawn was just pinned and I couldn't take his knight. So I let him get away with this one. And now it's a game again, I guess. Let's see, I go knight e5. He went c5 now, defending his knight. Move my king over to f2. Played rook f8. These moves are coming rather quick. I was low on time at this point, so they're not all the best moves, but not giving the game away quite. But here, let's see, instead of rook f8, he could start bringing his king in. This actually looks interesting for black and still playable. The chess engine wants to maneuver the king, not come forward like he did in the game, but maneuver his king to the center, holding on to the e-pawn, and then the rook, is threatening to come to the f-file. But so I defend here. Let's see, then h5, kicking my knight, then king to f6. A little bit funny, knight hopping over to c4, but he kind of lured my knight forward, well, kicked it to lure it forward and then chased it over to the queen side. So the knight comes over to c4, and, it's still a game. I'm up the exchange, but, white's pieces are pretty well placed, and he's kind of pushing my pieces around a bit. So still a playable game at this point. Let's see, he went rook f8, which is just directly putting pressure on that. I go rook e3 immediately, and he went king f6, which is another blunder, but, well, here, take a second. Can you spot the tactic that I missed? Okay, yeah, I just ran away with my knight, but there is a tactic. Pause the video if you want time to think about it. Okay, I'm giving the answer away now. It's a knight fork. I could have just played that. So anyway, time trouble. I dropped my knight back to g4. He brought his king forward. Lifted my rook up. I'm trying to control squares that knight might go to. There was a threat if I moved my king out of the way so I could bring the rook over. There was a threat of his knight fork on c2. I did notice that one. Let's see, he brought his king forward to h4. I played a3. Doesn't do a whole lot. Maybe I was going to play b4 or something to try and undermine the knight. He went h5 to kick my knight. I went knight e5, and then he ran out of time here. I had noticed that he couldn't take the pawn. In fact, taking the pawn, this is interesting, leads to a forced mate. So I was going to play this check, and I had noticed this line. If he comes forward, then I just step out of the way with my king. And I've got these two squares, these two ranks covered. He's got to step back to h1, and then the rook can come over and mate. And if he ran the other way, I wasn't quite sure, but there's actually a forced mate in this position too. I take here. Well, I'd noticed actually that this was a fork, so I knew that I was either getting the rook or mating him. But this is also a mate. The king only has one move, and then rook here is mate as well. A nice little mate with the knight covering the escape squares, and the pawns also covering these forward escape squares. Anyway, cute. So in this position where he ran out of time, his best move was, well, either king g5, he could have played that, or rook to f6. They're pretty equal. Let's just give one example, continuation. Dropping my rook back, this is the engine suggestions for how best play from this point. g5, king e3, so a little shuffle of my pieces. Notice that with the king on e3 now, and this square covered, he can't fork me here and he can't check me here, so the king is actually pretty safe on this square. And it's a central square, it's holding on to things, so it's good. He drops his knight back to c6. I would trade it off, and then play rook to d8, penetrate with my rook and start harassing things back here. And it gives an advantage to white. White's up the exchange. Let's count the pawns. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, black has a pawn for the exchange, so maybe something that black could still play on and hope to snag a draw. There's no clear win in any case, but, well, it would take time to find all these moves. And at this point, after I played knight to e5 here, he just ran out of time, probably wondering if he could take that pawn. Anyway, kind of a back and forth game. Had my share of blunders in that one, but interesting, I hope. See you next time. Bye.